So, Lara, George, obviously over the past couple of days you've had loads of questions about the Z9, and there's loads of stuff that you asked us when we first got here, and we've been talking about the best settings and so on, but we thought it'd be really useful to actually have a proper conversation about some of those questions and dive into how we fix some of the things that you are struggling with and how we kind of help you get the most out of both of these cameras. So first of all, I think one of the things that we can talk about straight away is you noticed that when myself and Neil were changing lenses, our Z9 has this shield that drops down, and you're like, that looks amazing.
What is that?
Yeah, how does our camera do that? So, but that is a really good point, because it's not something that's turned on by default on the Z9. So it's always making sure that if you do want to use that, you go into the menu and you can choose that setting in the setup menu, and you can change whether that turns on or off when you turn the camera on and off. So when you power your Z9 down, it then brings that shield down, stops you from getting dust and debris on your sensor. Luckily, you've obviously both got that turned on in your camera.
Serious lifesaver. I think especially for both of us when we're in particularly dusty locations or places where that sensor might get quite dirty.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we generally recommend to every kind of new Z9 user, because it just doesn't do that out of the box. It's always worth turning on. So that's always a really good thing that obviously you asked us to start off with. But I also know that you've got loads of questions, especially around autofocus. George, especially for you, moving from previous cameras as well, moving into Z9. So
I used a D5 for about 4 or 5 years, and this Z9 is my first entry into the mirrorless range, which I'm very happy and proud to be able to say now. 3D tracking. I never used to use it much. In fact, I never used it at all on the D5. You've shown me some amazing examples of using 3D tracking. What I would like to know is, in what situations would you use that effectively with the Z9?
Sure, okay, so there's a couple of things to cover off there first of all. With your D5, obviously you had 3D tracking, and we obviously have 3D tracking in the Z9. They're quite a bit different though. There's some things that make them stand out in the Z9 that really elevates 3D tracking, really allows you to use it in different situations. The real key difference is when it adds in what's called subject detection. So it is a 3D tracking system as a base. It will follow a subject. You can track a subject anywhere within 3D space if they're moving across your scene, if they're moving towards you or away. It works great for multiple subjects if you're working with birds in flight, or if you're working with people running towards you, whatever it is, 3D tracking is a great option. But the subject detection that's built into 3D tracking is what really elevates it in the Z9. And that subject detection is looking for actual recognizable things. It's looking for birds, it's looking for animals, it's looking for mammals. It can understand what a person is, it can understand what a vehicle is. And there's a very fine line between being just in 3D tracking, and the camera is tracking what it thinks is an object that you've told it to track, and then the camera actually specifically following an eye on a bird, for example, or following a bird in flight. And if you look at what happens to the 3D box on the back of your camera, that's a really good indicator as to what the camera is currently focusing on or what it's doing. So if it's in 3D tracking but the box is staying the same size and it's trying to follow a particular moving subject, that would very likely mean that you are in 3D tracking, but it's not actively seeing the subject as a definitive subject. If all of a sudden that box starts to change size and starts to relocate itself, so if on a bird, for example, it might hover over the chest of a bird and it'll basically cover that, the square will change to a rectangle. It might go to the head of the bird, and then it might go to the eye of the bird, and it will change to a smaller rectangle. So if you notice that that box is changing size, that is a clear indicator that it's using subject detection, and it's physically understanding that what you've put in front of it is an animal or a bird. And that will really track that subject, even against kind of backgrounds and busy backgrounds and stuff like that. If it goes into a bright sky, that will give you a really confidence-inspiring auto-focusing system.
So on a similar note, I have never had a camera with animal detection or tracking before. So I wanted to ask what the best mode would be to have it in. Because for example, when we were on Lunga and we were photographing the puffins, I really wanted to get one in flight, but obviously they're really quick and they were just zooming across so fast. So what would be the best function for that if I'm trying to get a puffin in flight?
There's a couple of modes you can put it in on the autofocus mode. First thing, to make sure it's set up on animal detection. I wouldn't have it on auto where it chooses between people, vehicles or animals. So we make sure the camera's set onto animal detection, and then depending on how far the bird was away from us, we could then use a number of different modes. 3D tracking that we've just been talking about might work if the system can identify that it's actually a bird. Sometimes you'll have really good success with the auto area, especially against, we're looking at the background here, we'd have a dark bird or even a puffin against this sort of background would be able to be detected against the clouds. Perhaps struggle a bit when it drops below the mountains there. So if we got into that situation, I'm then switching down to probably wide area small, or maybe even single point. And that's one of the things where it ties into the question that George was asking on the first day about programming these function buttons, because I have my camera set up in a way that if I touch this button here, it drops to single point. If it touches this button here, it drops to one of the custom modes, which is a long, thin 3x1, so I can track a bird going across left to right, right to left.
How would I go about setting that up within the menu?
So the 3x1 custom AF mode is something that came out on firmware 2, on the new firmware release for the Z9. It is really useful for birds in flight. First off, you can set your custom mode, so you choose the C1 or C2 mode, depending on how you set it up. So you press the AF switch on the side of the camera, rotate the dial to get the box, whether you want a vertical box, horizontal box, bird in flight, we're talking about, best done with a 3x1 horizontal box. What I would then do is I've gone into the custom control setting, so F2, and then I've assigned my button here, so when I hit it, it jumps to that mode. So I don't even have to press the AF on button as well. So I've got effectively 2 focus modes set up at once on the touch of a button. So it works really, really well.
It's also worth mentioning that that 3x1 shape is customizable. So if for whatever situation that shape isn't what you want, there are up to 20 different options you can choose from. You can change the height, the width. You can just set it as a single point if you want to. But the key thing is that it has subject detection built in. So like we were talking about earlier, you can create the size and the shape that you want, and then it will still look for eyes and faces and birds and animals and all those types of things as well at the same time. It's one of the very few ways that you can actually get single point and then have subject detection for eye tracking built into the same thing. So I know that especially for accuracy and a lot of the things that you like to do with your D5, you often use single point a lot of the time. So it's kind of like merging those two worlds together, that you get the single point accuracy that you loved, and then if it sees a face or an eye of an animal, it will then lock to that face and eye as well. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds in some cases, but you can only get that through the new C1 or C2 area modes.
Amazing. Excited to use it, especially because some of our work this year will be involving cheetahs.
Yeah.
And cheetahs, just like puffins, move very, very quickly across the screen. So I'll be using it then for sure.
I mean, a perfect example of that then, let's say for example you've got a cheetah that's on a hunt, and you want to specifically say to the camera that you only want it to focus on the cheetah, you don't want to focus on the prey that's in front of it, that might be say on the right hand side of your frame and the cheetah's on the left hand side of the frame. You could create an area that would only focus on that left hand side of the frame. It's obviously then a little bit up to you to keep the cheetah on the left of the frame, but it would mean that you're only focusing on that cheetah rather than the prey that's in front of it, because if you were using an area that covered the whole scene, it can switch between the two and you might not want that to happen.
That's really useful. And then I guess the last question would be, as wildlife photographers, are there any functions or settings that we should know about that we maybe haven't asked you about?
Any secret hidden tip?
Things like frame rate. So lots of people like shooting at the fastest frame rate, and I'm sure that you've filled loads of memory cards up over the first couple of weeks of having these cameras. But we have spoken to a lot of wildlife photographers that don't like the idea of shooting at 20 frames per second all the time. They like the idea of being able to take that down to 15 or to 12 or to 10, and in some cases 5 if they're not dealing with things like cheetahs and stuff like that. So being able to really choose the frame rate that you want and really narrow that down is always a really useful feature. And then obviously if you are using really fast frame rates and you need to make sure that your buffer is kind of fully extended, using fast enough cards is always really important. I think there's a lot of people that have realized that for a camera like this you just need to make sure it's backed up with the right memory cards to get the best out of it as well. But other than that, the other things I would mainly consider would be viewfinder brightness. Viewfinder brightness is a little bit of a hidden one that not many people really talk about, but I think it's a really important one for me, especially when tracking birds. I shoot with both eyes, and having a viewfinder that's bright enough to really let me kind of look through the viewfinder and then also look at the normal sky at the same time is really important. And especially with kind of previous electronic viewfinders, that could have been a little bit difficult because they're not always that bright, but the brightness level on this makes it so much easier and just easier to track and follow birds in flight and fast moving subjects.
So one of the other things that would be really useful, and it's available on all of the Z series, is customizing the eye menu. Unlike your DSLR, the eye menu on this can be programmed. So you can put all the features you use, which you have to search from the menu, you can put them onto the eye menu. So one touch, and then you can access all of those features really easily. I also use something called My Menu. So for the features that I can't assign onto the eye button, I create my own menu for that as well. If I create a My Menu and an eye menu customized to my settings, they're one touch away.
That's perfect. So I think for both of us, we're often in situations where we have to react very, very quickly. So I think what we have to do is meld what you've just been saying there about having things quickly at our disposal, and also try the different things out that the Z9 is offering us, because it seems there's lots of things. I've got to personally break my habit of just becoming stuck in my ways. As you mentioned, just being the single point focus guy. I have to try out lots of different types of focus, using some of those custom areas as well, and then customize my eye menu.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head there, is getting out and practicing it. And George, I don't think you have any excuses.
No excuses. I mean, as we've been filming, in fact, there's otters behind us.
There is indeed, yeah. So I think you're in the perfect location to really practice some of that stuff. And then obviously when you do go on your bigger trips, it hopefully means that the kit will get you the shots that you really want.
I think that's it though, isn't it? It's having that faith and trust in your kit, which I've always had.
Yeah.
When you're in those situations where you know you've got that one opportunity to get that shot, I feel very confident that this camera is going to be delivering every single time. If
Good.
it's anybody's fault, it's mine.
Good. Well, it's been fantastic running through some of those questions with you and running through some of the settings, and I only wish that it means that you get better with these cameras and lenses and get some more of the better images that you guys have been taking.
Absolutely.
Thank you.